Right then, so hi everyone, I'm Glyn Roberts. I have around 20 years of experience in industry. I have worked as a CTO in multiple businesses and in technical leadership positions in both the UK and in Europe. I'm a speaker and moderator for CTO Craft Bites. I'm the podcast host of Tech Kitchen, and my actual full-time job is CTO of Digital Solutions at VENTION, where we're an agency with over 3,000 engineers based across 11 countries in Europe, Asia, and the US. So, why do I want to give a talk about the failing CTO? Firstly, my current role exposes me to a lot of companies. I see hundreds of different companies through various stages of their journey. Some have excellent technical leadership and things are going very well. Others have quite serious problems. So I thought it would be interesting just to highlight what the 4 key reasons why businesses actually fail and how they actually tie into technical leadership. So 3 of the top 4, I think, heavily tie into technical leadership. So 29% run out of cash. Normally this is related to not being able to build the products fast, you're not being able to build the right product. It could even be things like hosting, having large instances where you just don't need them. 23% of the business failure is not having the right team. Obviously, technical capabilities is critical in all businesses nowadays, so we don't want the technical team to be the reason why a business fails. And 19% get out-competed. It's hard to understand, but small teams can move incredibly agile and incredibly fast. So even though you are a small team, you shouldn't need to always be, it shouldn't be an issue of getting out-competed. And the most common reason is no market need. Technically, I like to put more emphasis on the CEO and product team because it's more around the context of the problem you're trying to solve. But of course, technical leadership does fall into this also. So, secondly, this conference is about the strategic CTO. So I thought it would be interesting to show some outcomes where this is where less than ideal technical leadership is actually in place. And thirdly, learning from your own mistakes is very painful and expensive, but learning from others is free and much less painful. So there's definitely something to be said where, the more painful your experience is, the more you learn from it. But I'm giving you the opportunity to try and avoid that here. So today I'm going to talk through 3 different stories of what could be considered failed technical leadership and what it costs to get back onto the right track afterwards. So with all these issues I'm showing, it's always possible to recover from them, but you need the money in the business to be able to invest to be able to do that. Hindsight, of course, is 2020, and companies never have that luxury. So the 3 stories I'm showing today is what I see as the most common issues inside the businesses. And as a note, the 3 companies I talk about here are fake companies. I've changed, their names are not real. And for all the CTOs here today that work with me at VENTION, this is not about you. I've made sure I'm not talking about any of your businesses. So story number 1, a company called Sports For You. So they sell sporting goods through online multiple stores, very API driven, dealing with the delivery process, the whole end-to-end system. It's founded by one person, and he made himself both the CEO and CTO. I know there's a few CEOs/CTOs in the business here today. And as the company became successful, he ended up hiring more contractors, and obviously these contractors came and went over the course of 10 years. And actually was successful in selling the business, but is tied in to continue to run the business and hit certain growth targets. So everything sounds great, right? Big success. Well, because he's tied into the business, obviously he's still responsible for the entire platform. And there were major outages occurring daily, obviously stopping new sales. Big sales days like Black Fridays, it just couldn't handle. And new products, features, or integrations would take a very long time to actually implement. I think it's quite clear there was no technical due diligence done by the corporation that actually ended up purchasing him. But obviously they protected themselves by tying in the CEO and obviously making their exit value worth on how the business does moving forward. So why was everything so unstable for them? They only had about 20 EC2 instances, so not a crazy number there. But they were running on these 20 EC2 instances around 200 applications, 60 different services. Some were in a stop state, but you can't delete them. We need to switch them on at certain points of the year. Whack-a-mole game, which I'm sure we've come across before, where you fix one thing and 2 other things break somewhere else. All servers are snowflakes, so therefore there was a hacking approach to the way they added new functionality, no managed scaling solution, And no documentation, of course, just the CEO/CTO's understanding of how these services are supposed to work together. So I qualify this as a sales-focused strategy for the business. There was little thought about the technical debt, managing the platform, or future stability. Decision-making was all about bringing new services into the platform, obviously trying to increase revenue. This happens an awful lot in product companies. I'm sure several people here are probably experiencing the same thing right now, where you feel like you spend more time acting like an agency rather than focusing on your actual product offerings, because the big clients that you have are the ones that can pay you the biggest money right now. Obviously, sometimes this is necessary, but in this case, 10 years of doing this has clearly taken its toll on the platform. So the task here is stabilize the solution, progress with the roadmap, and they want a fast rebuild. I saw a question actually earlier with Mary asking about the rebuild option. So when it comes to rebuilds, 99% of platforms do not actually need a big bang rebuild. The risks, of course, with doing a full rebuild and switching over to a new platform is incredibly high. It's likely something critical will be missed, no matter how great a planning sessions you do, no matter how great your team is. There's always something that's overlooked. The timeline to achieve these is always a long time as well, 6 months, a year and a half. And obviously that's a long time before we start to see value, and businesses will still expect you to maintain the existing platform, add the odd feature that's critical, that needs to go live right now. So you then have to try and keep the new platform up to speed as well. So the obvious solution to tackle this is in a more smaller, iterative way. A great way to actually approach this is actually identified with the Visible Ops Handbook, a great book for those who haven't read it, and one of the same authors that wrote the Phoenix Project, which is also a great book, which I'm sure many of us have come across. If you haven't read the Phoenix Project and you find yourself in this situation, that's definitely my recommendation for the first thing to read. So you assess the core parts of the system, you stabilize and monitor what's going on, you document where you can, you upgrade or remove applications, especially the really unstable services, and add automated testing. So in this case, after 12 months, obviously we're still progressing with them. We were able to reduce the downtime, and the strategy to replace parts of the system to make it much more manageable was started. It obviously allows the platform to continue to grow whilst paying off technical debt. So the key thing highlighted here is you can recover from these solutions, but you need the money to be able to keep on investing. In this case, they're spending over £300,000 a year on a small team to try and keep on progressing in this way. And don't forget, obviously, technical debt actually increases over time. So if you do have technical debt in your system, you keep on adding new functionality, new services, that actually gets more expensive to obviously replace that out in the future. Now, to try and come from the opposite angle from the other biggest use case I see, a story called Investment for Us. So this company built a tool for collecting user-submitted data against the investment market, which they're already in. They then wanted to analyze the results, provide reports, and obviously improve their services from that. So what's the problem in this case? Well, they couldn't extend the existing platform without losing all the data in the database. That's an interesting one. I'll come back on to the reason why shortly. Trying to get quality reporting out of the system was very difficult for them, and the original members of staff that built this had left the business. So what had happened here? Am I on the right one? There we go. Yeah, so what happened here? They decided to use bleeding edge technology. Well, it was bleeding edge at the time. Next.js, Apollo with GraphQL. I know it's much more stable now, and big organizations use this. And what they were most happy about is they don't need back-end engineers anymore. Apollo with GraphQL provides you the API, and the front-end engineers can just request what data they want. Back then, though, Apollo wasn't actually in version 1 yet. There was no long-term support version. So any changes to the database schema actually required the entire database to be rebuilt, which obviously meant all the data was lost. So clearly, they'd picked a technology that wasn't actually production ready yet. There's obviously a long-winded option here where you can migrate the data out, upgrade, and then migrate it back, but that's an awful lot of work every time you want to do a schema change. And something else that we see often, engineers run away after the first version when they realize the solution they've built is not suitable. I'm going to come back onto that onto that point in a moment. So I would qualify them as falling into an engineering-empowered strategy, or maybe even CV-driven decision-making. inexperienced engineers given the power to make decisions without the oversight, and obviously they're going to often choose the most current technology trend that's going on in the market right now. So keeping on with this, I'm sure most of us have seen these requests come from our teams before. They want the latest technology or perfect clean code, which is admirable, but obviously the business needs a product to sell. Again, rebuild requests are common, or they need to refactor a large part of the code base, or let's build in the hottest, latest language. And continuing on from this, we need to move this entire platform into microservices or serverless. But obviously, if you've only got a small team, it's going to be very hard for you to maintain this. Cheap third parties, we can just use this third party, but now you're locked in, and obviously they can boil the frog on price increases. Blockchain, something we used to see 5-10 years ago, because why not put our database on the blockchain? And, coming from a developer near you, a new AI solution, that's going to just be ridiculous for no reason whatsoever. I'm thinking of things like a customized logo header based on the user's experience, based on what we know about the user. Let's change the logo for some reason. Obviously, there's valid use cases for all these technologies, but a square peg does not fit into every hole. As another great example of trying to over-engineer something, I've got a mistake I made myself. I don't think the CTO is actually here today, so that's good, that I used to work for at the time. But I was asked to build a store locator, so as a customer, where are the nearest 3 stores to me? A few Google searches, you find on Stack Overflow, some great queries. You implement that, and you obviously want the most exact query, don't you? So the one that took into account the curvature of the Earth was clearly the one I chose, so a nice complex SQL query. I was super happy with it, pushed it to production, and what happens, the production servers now really start to struggle. CTO comes to me and says, Pythagoras' theorem would be absolutely fine here, Glyn, what are you doing? So this is just an example of engineers always want to do the best thing, the right thing in what is, in theory, the right way to approach a problem. So with every platform, I want to build with microservices because that's the right way to build platforms. Obviously, with the experience that we have as CTOs, we're the ones there to hold those lines and say we're not at that stage yet from a business. And obviously, we still want to have our businesses trialing new technologies. It needs to be in a managed way, though. Those that have come across the technology radar, obviously, that's a great approach to handle this, where you're able to assess in a consistent way new technologies and how you incorporate them. But when businesses jump from assess to adopt without anything in between, that's when it leads to problems. So the task here is let's make it possible to add new features and implement the analytics. In this case, the platform was actually quite small, and the data they're actually collecting was just relational anyway. They didn't know what they wanted their analytics to be, so we're able to just switch over, build a RESTful API, use the SQL database, and then from there you can build analytics dashboards either with Looker or manually with SQL queries. It's boring and much less sexy, but much easier to maintain and grow as the business needs. So in this example, it took 3 months to solve this one. So they've got a product they can use and scale with, and analytics can easily be built and obviously customized as they move forward. Of course, over time, if they want to scale larger, they may need to refactor some of this work, but the immediate needs are easily met. And when we have businesses come along and say, build for large, I want to build for large scale, we should really only be building for when we actually need it. So what you've got available in cloud computing right now can handle an awful lot without having to do crazy things with your code, like separating out into separate services. A simple monolith can sit on autoscale architecture, load balancer on front, cloud-based RDS. You can build replicas if you need to, and a caching system. That can handle an awful lot of traffic without having to go down the extra work and maintenance costs of obviously having in microservices or even serverless. I've definitely come across a few engineers that say, I can build an entire serverless platform from scratch in the same amount of time as it takes me to build a monolith. Fantastic, you're really good. But the problem is you say yes to go down that path, he'll build you it in that same time, but he won't want to hang around and maintain it, will he? He'll want to go to another business and do the same thing again. And now you can't use juniors or mid-engineers to understand what's going on and maintain this platform because there's so much more additional complexity. So I like to highlight that boring is good where you can. Obviously, if you are that type of business where you need to scale at a very large level, then of course these other technologies are suitable. And going on to my final story, a company called Events for Me. So this company actually provides services for events like this one. They supply partner booths with customized tablets for data collection. They have registration desks. And they used to run about 4 to 5 events every single week. Obviously, during the heavy event season, much more. During the holidays, much less. So what was their problem in this case? Their profit for each event was very small. This was mainly due to the operational overhead of actually running the events. So why was this actually happening? Each tablet required manual configuration. So some events had 200-300 tablets. So what they would do is they would turn up with these 300 tablets. They'll then have to log into each one with into the Wi-Fi network, go into Dropbox, pull the files locally, configure how they needed to, test them, hand them out to their partners, end of the day, get them back, and then validate that all the data is actually synced to the cloud. As you can imagine, that was a big operational overhead to them. So I qualify this as a stay-in-your-lane strategy, or maybe even not my department. When technology does not talk with the operations team to understand that the more complex they make the platform, the more harder it is to actually operationally run, obviously these types of challenges crop up. So it's no surprise that what is looking like a successful business was struggling from a profit perspective because they're having to invest so much just to keep the platform running. So the task here, relatively simple, try and improve the operational activities at an event and reduce the amount of people needed and the chance of human error. You could also use the word that we all hate. I'm not saying the word. So in this case, it's actually an easy one. Make an Android app that registers with a central cloud service. You pass the MAC address so you know which device is connected. You create a web interface to build the experiences beforehand. You can even schedule what days it should do what. Obviously, this syncs the experience with the Android tablet. You can even create NFC cards where you put the Wi-Fi details on and just swipe them on all the tablets. And you have automated consolidation of data at the end. So the tablet will say, yes, everything's in the cloud, it's all fine. So, a result like this, after 4 months, you have a solution that actually reduces the head count down from 5 to 10 people down to 2. This did cost around 100K to build, but the savings of running events was reduced by about 70%. So they made their money back within 4 months. Again, the earlier you start, the faster value is actually delivered to the business. So, as a summary, if you don't provide the strategy, others in your business are going to do it for you. They'll, of course, have the best of intentions and believe they're doing what's best for the business. But us as leaders, we have much more context and experience than people underneath us. So sometimes you do need to take shortcuts and go against the best practices, as long as the risks are actually understood and managed. The business can obviously still thrive. So if you're not making the decisions, make sure you know what decisions are actually being made. I want to highlight that even though I called this a failing CTO, failing in any of these areas could absolutely be suitable for the business. And obviously, we're going to hear about more ways of managing your business and trying to avoid failure later on during these 2 days. It's all about the context. So going through my 3 examples here, the first one with heavy amount of technical debt. Would he been able to sell the business if he didn't have that amount of technical debt? If he committed the funds earlier instead of going for new services to fix the code base? I don't know, but likelihood is they probably wouldn't have been able to do that, and the business would have disappeared. So even though you could look at that code base and go, okay, this is technical leadership failure because the code base is so poor, if the funds were not available for him to be able to fix this, then technically he's doing what's best for the business, keeping it going in a slow, encapsulated way to at least get us to the point where they could get sold, have investment, and obviously start paying back that technical debt. For the second example, allowing your team to actually determine the technology is obviously great. We want our teams to be able to do that. In this case, where the engineers were obviously unhappy and obviously left because they felt embarrassed that everyone's pointing fingers at them. If they turn this around to say, this is a trial, we're trialing this technology, this isn't an end solution, it didn't work, we're going to have to change the back end, they would have been much less concerned about the fact that they were getting blamed for a decision that this was made. So again, we need to be there to be the safety net to make sure that decisions they're making are appropriately communicated and appropriately managed. If we're going to build with some bleeding edge technology, we call it a trial. It may fail. We let the business know it may fail. But otherwise, if we're saying it's product version number 1, and then we have to go out and rebuild part of the system, obviously they'll feel very uncomfortable about that fact. And finally, not having your engineers understand how the technology they build is actually used. Obviously, there's different ways to try and tackle this. Common way is you put them on the support desk for 2 weeks. They'll suddenly, in a blink of an eye, you'll have 100 tickets of operational improvements that they can build, which is obviously going to make life a lot easier for us. So the talks here over these 2 days will help you identify many issues that you may be cropping up with, but you don't have to always follow them. As long as you're aware of the risks and you manage them, life is good. So this is why it's great to be here at events like this at CTO Craft Conference. And VENTION, who I work for, we're a CTO Craft sponsor. We have a booth at the back, so feel free to come and talk with us at any point. No matter your challenge, we've seen worse. Not our official tagline. We also work with stable, well-run businesses too. So thank you all for listening, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So we've got a hand up over here. We've got a microphone for you, sir.
Hi, Tom Walker, Metal. With Situation 1, which is one I've come across before, how did you persuade the CTO/CEO that the code is built and it was a big pile of tech debt? And was there any resistance to that view?
So this all comes to around showing the value. So engineers are always going to say there's a problem with the code. They always are. I can look at some perfect code and I'll find a problem with it. Everybody can do. And when it comes to technical debt, it's where's the right time? How much is it hindering you to actually continue with your development? So with CEOs, CFOs, they all want to see the numbers. If you say that we spend 2 months worth of time solving some of the technical debt and we expect the ability of our teams to improve the number of sprint points they can complete, there's clear cost and value coming out of that. Obviously, we want to tackle tech debt before it gets to the point where the overhead is so high that the business can't really execute and still deliver products and features. So when we're getting that pains coming through where products and features take a very long time, then you've sort of just gone past over that cusp where we should be spending more time on that. So if you say, right, I need to stop the team for 2 months to focus on technical debt, that's a very hard thing to persuade a CEO to do. But if you tie it into their daily work and say, we're going to reduce our sprint points, but we're going to improve our, clean up our technical debt as we go, that's another way to approach it. So I know you've got to follow up.
Yeah, I guess it's more the case that the CTO is the person who's written the code, maybe clients and thoughts.
Oh, okay.
The person who's actually built it up, they're like, this code's great. Why do you need more?
Okay, so the question is, what if the CTO wrote the code that is full of this technical debt? So this is where the CEO/CTO role is obviously very interesting. They are part sales, they're part technical, and the question is which side do they fall on? Some are very strongly technical and they do the CEO part, in a good capacity, but they're essentially an engineer. Then you've got people that are more business-minded, but they've also had some experience being an engineer and wrote this up. Having honest conversations about the status of the code. I mean, you say, look, you've done great to get to the business where it needs to be, to get that code where it needs to be, but it now needs to change to get you to the next step. Obviously, this is managing upwards. This is managing your CEO and trying to do it in a way where it doesn't offend them. Most of the CTOs I come across that are CEOs/CTOs, they're a bit like me now. I'll say, look, the way I code now is terrible. If I've built a platform, I know some of the other engineers are going to do a much better job of it than me. So ideally, you'll have a CTO that understands that. Obviously, he's laughing, so I'm assuming that might not always be the case. So essentially, I think it's just explaining the journey. The fact that, yes, the code that you wrote got to where we needed to be in a fast way. Now we need to go to the next stage. You're not allowed to touch the code anymore. That's my job as a CTO. You're banned from taking you off GitHub. If you want to do code reviews, you can do. But it's a real issue. I've actually come across this in my career as well, where the CEO used to have his own little side projects on the platform. Or how one of the original developers he worked with had a side project too. So I feel for you. My heart goes out. It's all about having to manage upwards and obviously explain to them the situation and try and make it clear to them that you can't have two chefs in the same kitchen. So I've got some questions up on the board. Thank you. Okay, so start with the top one. I understand boring tech from a business and even technical perspective. How do you retain your engineers if they keep working on boring tech? Okay, absolutely. So when I was an engineer, I wanted to work on the latest technology, of course. But again, when I mentioned about retention, if you give an engineer too much decision-making capability and that ends up to bite him in the ass, he's going to look at the situation and go, okay, look, everyone's blaming me for this mistake where I was the person that made this decision. So therefore, therefore I'm not going to stay and I'm going to move on to another business. Obviously, that's a big challenge. So yes, the trial piece, the technical radar piece, get them involved in the R&D process so they can play around with this. If you have training programs, this is great. But diving straight into, we're going to build a large part of our platform on a new technology which is essentially untested by the business, that's going to be really hard for you. Boring tech is much but nicer and much easier because it's stable. Do you want to be on the on-call rotor, guys? If you've got some new cutting-edge technology, how difficult is that going to be for you at 3 o'clock in the morning to fix? Where boring technology, we know how it works, it's going to be much less challenging. So I hope you've answered that. Can you recommend good books for CTOs? Actually, okay, so I wasn't expecting this question. I've got every CTO book that's been released. The original ones were very good at the time, but aren't very current with the ways we need to work now. We're much more web-based, very different, like they've moved on. There's like the modern CTO, there's the CTO, CIO diaries, I think it's called. Not too bad. I even got a book called The Next CTO, where halfway through it, it was clearly written by an AI program, where it actually came across came across about some incest porn inside this printed book that I'd purchased. It was absolutely ridiculous. He hadn't even proofreaded it before he sold it on Amazon. So obviously, that was a bad review on there. There's been one more, Think Like a CTO, that's just been released recently. I've only just started that, but that actually looks quite interesting. When it comes to any other books for being CTOs, it's all about what you're trying to focus on. You've got team topologies and the way you manage your teams. You've got agile books. I mean, go all day. I'm sure Andy is going to send around an email at the end of this of all the books that have been highlighted for CTOs. So it's a very broad topic, that one. How do you persuade your company not to do a rebuild? Okay, that's obviously going from the opposite angle there. I think it's quite easy to explain not to do a rebuild. Okay, when I say not to do a rebuild, I say don't do a big bang rebuild, where you build a new platform, standalone on the side. If you need to do a rebuild and there's key issues with your current platform, you do it in an incremental way. You start off with certain pieces, you build out services, replace out functionality. So over time, it is essentially a rebuild. But it's not a case of saying, this is a brand new platform we're building on the side, in 6 months we're going to have it live, we're going to switch over to it, life's going to be great. The amount of companies that come to us with that challenge is ridiculous. And obviously the CTO, when I say CTO, the lead developer that was the CTO there at the time has obviously moved on, and there's a lot of issues, functionality missing, so I do try and avoid that. If we finished there? Okay, great. Well, thank you for the time and listening to me today. I'll be in the back corner for the afternoon, for the rest of today and tomorrow, so if you've got any follow-up questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.